Good day, good people, and welcome to Revolutionary Belovedness. I'm Robert Farrell. Whether you are here for the live session or watching the recording, thank you for being here. If you will, let me know in the chat section that you can hear me okay. And please remember that the chat section remains open for the whole session, so feel free to chime in at any time, and we will do what we can to bring that into the conversation. Let us take a moment to settle in before we reflect on forgiveness as liberation rather than forgetting. We're going to explore forgiveness as a path toward freedom, honoring both harm and truth. So settle into the seat beneath you and let your shoulders soften downward. Bring attention to the breath, moving in the chest, steady and unhurried. And allow the hands to rest in the lap, palms turned upward as a gesture of receiving. And call to mind a moment when release felt possible, even briefly. And let that memory warm the space around your heart. Let's just rest here for a few slow breaths before we begin breathing in and breathing out. Friends, freedom carries a different space and a different shape than most people expect. Freedom arrives quietly, often after a long season of carrying weight, and it rarely announces itself with fireworks. Forgiveness belongs to this quiet category of freedom. It is less an event than a homecoming, a gradual return to a self that hate had crowded out. And when Valerie Kaur writes that forgiveness is freedom from hate, she offers a definition worth sitting with slowly, because it relocates forgiveness away from the realm of erasure and places it firmly in the realm of liberation. This single shift changes everything about how the work of healing can be approached. So consider what happens inside a person who holds on to hatred for a long stretch of time. That hatred takes up residence, and it becomes a tenant that pays no rent and yet demands constant attention, reshaping thoughts, coloring relationships, and narrowing the field of joy available in any given day. Yes, my friends, forgiveness is freedom from hate. And forgiveness, understood as liberation, becomes an act of reclaiming that inner room. The memory of what happened remains intact. The facts stay exactly as true as they ever were. What changes is the grip, whether hatred gets to keep living there rent-free, shaping every decision that follows. The room itself can be reclaimed for other purposes entirely, for rest, for creativity, for those ordinary pleasures that hatred had crowded into the margins. And this distinction matters enormously for anyone who has ever felt pressured to forgive too quickly, as though forgiveness were a performance owed to an audience rather than a gift given to oneself. Healing moves according to its own timeline, and that timeline belongs entirely to the person doing the healing. Choosing to wait, choosing to hold a boundary, choosing to keep distance from someone who caused harm can itself become an act of agency and self-respect. And the path toward freedom honors the pace of the one walking it. Now, this same question of timing, of knowing when the heart is ready and when it needs more time, is exactly what Valerie's image of labor and birth is built to illuminate. Birth requires both breathing and pushing, two movements that seem opposite yet work in partnership. Breathing creates spaciousness, rest, and the capacity to keep going. Pushing engages directly with what is difficult, moving through grief, through rage, through the tangled memory of trauma, in service of bringing something new into being. Forgiveness, understood this way, becomes a form of pushing. The labor of engaging painful sensation and emotion long enough that something new can emerge on the other side. The birth of a self no longer organized around the wound. Discerning when to rest and when to push, ask for deep listening to one's own inner condition. Some seasons call for breathing, for gathering strength, for simply surviving with tenderness toward oneself. And other seasons open a door toward pushing further into the material that has been avoided. Contemplative practice itself moves between stillness and engagement, between silence and speech, and forgiveness work follows this same rhythm. Rushing the process serves no one. Trusting the rhythm serves everyone. And a person who has learned to listen this closely to their own readiness carries a skill that exceeds far beyond any single wound, a capacity for self-trust that steadies every future season of difficulty. And friends, this same discernment about timing carries into another question worth holding with equal care: the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. These two processes travel together in conversation, yet remain distinct in practice. Forgiveness can happen entirely within one person, a private transformation of the heart that requires nothing from the one who caused harm. Reconciliation asks for something additional. It requires the person who caused harm to take full ownership, to name what happened honestly, and to offer genuine accountability. Forgiveness can be complete on its own. Reconciliation depends on two willing parties meeting each other in truth. This separation liberates the one who was harmed from any obligation to wait for an apology that may never arrive. And freedom becomes available regardless of whether the person who caused harm ever accepts responsibility. At the same time, when accountability does arrive, when someone stands in the heat of their own shame and chooses transformation, reconciliation becomes possible as a separate and beautiful unfolding. Both paths deserve honor. Neither depends on the other to be real. Accountability is what makes this second path possible, and understood rightly, it becomes an act of love in its own right. A genuine apology grows from a very deep sense of belonging to oneself. What we may be referring to this year as revolutionary belonging. A recognition that worthiness remains intact even after causing harm. Standing in one's worst moment while still claiming worthiness creates the ground from which real growth becomes possible. And so maybe we can learn from Brian Stevenson's insight. It resonates here. He says every person carries more than the worst thing they have ever done. Friends, remember, brokenness runs through every human life, even as the particular shapes of that brokenness differ enormously in weight and consequence. Holding this truth allows both the survivor and the perpetrator to move toward a healing that punishment alone could never provide. This same principle scales upward from a single apology exchange between two people to the reckoning of an entire nation that they might undertake. Systems of accountability can move beyond retribution towards something closer to collective liberation, asking a larger question than simply who deserves punishment. The question becomes, what would allow harm to stop repeating itself across generations, and what repair actually looks like, and who gets to lead that process of repair? A country capable of full ownership, capable of saying plainly that harm occurred and promise its non-repetition, opens a pathway toward collective transformation that shame and punishment alone have never achieved. Letting those most harmed help lead this process honors their wisdom and ensures that repair addresses the actual wound rather than a version of it shaped by those who caused it. Friends, wisdom traditions across the world recognize this same pattern at every scale, from the personal to the national. Living in deep nonviolence asks for a commitment that extends inward as well as outward, refusing to let hatred take root even toward those who have caused harm, whether that harm was carried by one person or by generations of a nation's history. Humility of heart allows space for remembering that every person, including the one who caused injury, walks their own path toward wholeness. And solidarity with all beings widens the circle of compassion until it includes the possibility of transformation for everyone involved, survivor and perpetrator alike, without collapsing the very real differences in their experience. And this same solidarity echoes something that Wayne Teasdale once named as humanity's deepest gift: the capacity to become creatures of boundless love, caring, compassion, and wisdom. Forgiveness as liberation stands as one of the clearest expressions of this capacity in action. It asks for courage rather than weakness, discernment rather than haste, and truth-telling rather than denial. The one who forgives loses nothing of the truth of what happened. What gets released is only the weight that hatred adds on top of that truth. Weight that serves no healing purpose and only compounds suffering. Joy finds its way back into the picture in ways that might surprise. Healing from trauma includes joy as a necessary companion rather than an afterthought, a signal that life continues to hold beauty even after harm. Laughter returning, pleasure becoming possible again, connection with others deepening. These become evidence that the labor has borne fruit rather than distractions from it. And the birth metaphor completes itself here. Something new has arrived, carrying its own capacity for delight. And that delight becomes proof that the labor was worth undertaking. Friends, forgiveness as liberation then offers a path that honors memory, it honors truth, and it honors the pace of the one walking it. It refuses the false choice between remembering fully and living freely, since both become possible together. The past stays present in its full weight and detail. Hatred, meanwhile, finds its exit. And what remains is a self capable of carrying history with clarity while stepping forward into a future no longer defined by what was done, but by what becomes possible now that the weight has been set down. A future carried forward by a self both wiser and lighter for having done this labor. Thank you for sharing in this reflection with me. Again, the chat section's open. Feel free to add any comments or reflections of your own. And now let us take a few minutes in guided inquiry to open ourselves to experience, to intake this as a felt sense. Feel the weight of the body where it meets the chair, where it meets the floor or the ground. Notice the temperature of the air against the skin. Allow the next breath to arrive on its own without shaping it. And follow it down into the chest, into the belly, into wherever space it finds open to receive it. There's nowhere else to be right now other than exactly here. Notice the places where the body holds on. The jaw, perhaps, the space between the shoulder blades, a closed fist resting quietly in the lap. Holding on has its own weight, its own particular warmth or tightness. And there is room here simply to notice it without changing anything yet. Somewhere in this holding, a memory may arise. A face, a voice, a moment carried for longer than feels fair. Just let it arrive fully with all its detail intact. Nothing here asks for that memory to soften or shrink or explain itself. The truth of what has happened can stay exactly as true as it has always been, honored fully, denied nothing of its weight or its detail. And what does this memory feel like in the body? Is there heat in it or a kind of coldness? Does it sit heavy in the chest? Or does it live lower, coiled up in the belly? Allow the sensation to speak in its own language without needing translation into words. And now, alongside that memory, notice whether something else is also present. Something that has attached itself to the truth of what happened. A tightness that goes beyond the memory itself. A bracing, a readiness to defend or explain. Well, this is often where hatred lives in the body, riding alongside the truth, but not the same as the truth. And notice that the memory itself may feel almost still, almost settled, like a stone that has found its resting place. And the bracing, by contrast, often has a restlessness to it, a low hum of readiness that never quite lets the body rest. And it is this restlessness that is worth feeling clearly, since it is it is the part that liberation addresses, not the stone itself. This restlessness. Breathing in, there's room to hold the memory fully exactly as it happened. And breathing out, there is room to loosen only the bracing, only the readiness to defend. And notice that these are two different things held in the same breath. The memory stays, the truth stays. What loosens is something else entirely, something that was never required in order for the truth to remain true. Where in the body might this loosening begin, if it began anywhere at all? Perhaps in the jaw or the neck, maybe in the space around the heart, perhaps nowhere yet, and that is welcome too. Friends, what would it feel like to set down the weight of hatred while the memory stays exactly as vivid, exactly as honored, exactly as true? Is there a place in the body that already knows the difference between forgetting and releasing? There's no need to answer in words. The body may already know something the mind has not yet caught up to. Just let it show itself in its own time, in its own language of warmth, of breath, of small unclenchings that may or may not arrive today. Let us enter into a time of silence. Breathing in, I hold what is true. Breathing out, I set down the hatred. Breathing in, I hold what is true. Breathing out, I set down the hatred. Let that verse rest in the body the way water rests in a still container. Notice what is shifted even slightly, and notice whatever remains exactly as it was. Both are welcome here. Neither needs to be different than it is. And slowly let your awareness widen again and to include the room around you, the solid ground beneath you. Feel free to wiggle your fingers and roll your shoulders and open your eyes when ready. And dear ones, may this moment of release, however small, travel gently into the rest of the week. May the body carry ease. May the heart carry both truth and freedom together without needing to choose between them, remembering fully and living freely in the very same breath. Thank you for sharing time in this practice. I'd like to offer you 4 questions that you can spend more time with to deepen this practice. They will be in the notes for the replay on the Mighty Network, so you can revisit them there. If something comes up as I share these tonight and you'd like to provide any type of answer or response, feel free to do that. First, what does this phrase, forgiveness is freedom from hate, open up for you? And how does it differ from ideas about forgiveness that ask a person to minimize or forget what exactly happened? Next, how do you discern in your own life when it is time to rest and breathe and when it's time to push through difficult emotion toward the kind of healing that still keeps the truth of what happened fully intact? Next, in what ways does separating forgiveness from reconciliation help hold both freedom and truth at once, especially in relationships where harm occurred and full accountability may never arrive? And next, what would genuine accountability look like in a situation you are personally familiar with, whether in a relationship, a community, or on a larger societal scale in a way that honors the harm rather than glosses over it? I hope that these 4 questions will help deepen the experience from this evening and the topic. Forgiveness is never easy. Forgiveness as liberation rather than forgetting. Let me allow just another moment or two in case there's anyone that would like to share something in the chat before we depart. I will also remind you that the recording will be available on Mighty Network and YouTube, so you can re-explore it there or share it with friends and family. Also, to remind you that next month we will begin slowly transitioning from our space on Mighty Network to be present on Substack and Crowdcast. I know many of you are also already following Substack, so thank you very much for that. And Crowdcast is what we'll be using for these live stream sessions. I know that some of you have visited on Crowdcast when we were there before, so thank you. Well, friends, whether you were here for the live session or are watching the recording, thank you for continuing to be part of our small community. We look forward to seeing you next time. Good night for now.